Hello everybody, my name is Rachel and welcome to another weekly wrap-up. Though this week it's more like a fortnightly wrap-up. I didn't feel like doing one of these last week, so I have 8 things from the past 2 weeks to talk about today. I am running out of time to get this filmed and I keep being interrupted by screaming children, like screaming bloody murder right in front of my house, so this is gonna be kind of difficult to film. If you end up hearing children screaming in the end result, I apologize for that. There's nothing I can do, especially not today. So let's get into it. The first book I have to talk about is The Margarets by Sheri Tepper. This is one of the 2 books that I completed reading during Tome Topple round 6. And this is probably one of the more enjoyable books that I've read by Tepper so far. My favorite book by her, the one that I think is just really excellent, is Erasing the Stones. The Margarets is just one that I think has a very interesting story, but I am, as is typical with me and Tepper, ambivalent about how I feel about certain aspects of it and how she executes elements. So this is about a woman named Margaret. As a young child, she lived on Phobos, one of the moons of Mars, and she imagined herself or aspects of herself as other people and gave them names. These other personalities, these other versions of Margaret actually split off from her and are real people who deviate from her. It's kind of like a parallel worlds thing where at specific junctures when she does or does not make important decisions, she splits. She ultimately ends up back on Earth with her family and has to go on like a quest to discover and bring together all of the different versions of herself scattered across multiple inhabited planets in the galaxy, and has to bring them all together again to save Earth and save humanity. The other key thing in this story is that it's kind of in the far future and Earth is battling a massive overpopulation problem and is, I think, kind of a member of this association of alien species called the Dominion. Only thing is, the Dominion seems really big on like ecological restoration and taking care of your planet, and humanity has completely wrecked Earth. And of course with the overpopulation problem, that's not going to get any better. So essentially the Dominion, or one of the really powerful species within the Dominion, has inflicted this punitive measure on Earth to reduce their population. They're basically sold into slavery to other species. In particular, species that utterly despise humans and do their very best to torture, kill, maim them before their enslavement period is over. This is one of the things that I don't really agree with. So, the overall story of Margaret and her multiple personalities and what happens to each of these versions of Margaret, and then how all their individual stories piece together this overall story of what has happened to Earth and its eventual fate, was really interesting. But like I said, as is typical with me and Tepper, I really enjoy like half of the elements in her books and then I have real problems with the other half, and sometimes just the way that she writes her books, the way that she actually executes her story, and the way that she represents certain things. I think that all of these elements basically boil down to a single weakness of this book, which is that there are too many things going on. There are too many characters, too many storylines, too many different time periods and rates of time passage, and there are so many issues and messages within all of that. And so Tepper has all of these balls in the air, and I think she's successful at juggling about half of them, and then the other half kind of fall down in disappointing ways. So yeah, I can only really reiterate that it was a very interesting story. I flew through most of it and I would recommend reading it, but I could see a lot of people not agreeing with the things that I also had issues with. So I'm glad I read it, and I will continue reading Tepper because I keep having this reaction to a lot of her books, but I can't deny that she always writes interesting stories, and they're great books to discuss and to buddy read with somebody else. I buddy read this one with Joe from Final Blow Joe, which was great because we could talk about a lot of stuff in it. So onwards to the next thing by Tepper, whatever that may be. The other book that I completed for Tome Topple is The Moon and the Other by John Kessel. I'm not going to talk about it here because I've already filmed an entire video about all of my reactions to it, and that'll probably be up in a couple of days. The short version is that I ended up really liking it. I went into it completely blind with no expectations at all, and it ended up kind of blowing me away by the end. The children disappeared, but now the dog is barking. This is just not a fun morning for filming. Next, I read Giant Days, Extra Credit by John Allison. The artwork in this is by various artists for each of the bonus stories. So this is a collection of extra stories in the Giant Days series, and it was okay. I really love the main comic series. This collection, however, was kind of hit or miss for me. I quite liked the first story, which is kind of a what if, what would have happened if the three women hadn't met initially at college and where their paths might have led them. Spoiler alert, they still meet each other, which was, I thought, a really interesting hypothetical question. The rest of the stories in here, though, especially the last one, which is about another character entirely, I really didn't care about at all. So I think I ended up giving this 3 stars. I think the main volumes of the series are a lot better. Next, I read Rogue Protocol by Martha Wells, which is the 3rd Murderbot Diaries novella. This little series begins with All Systems Red and Artificial Condition. Both of those are out now, and I love them. I gave the first 2 in this series 5 stars, just utterly adored them. Rogue Protocol was also quite good, but I feel like maybe the question in it, the mission that Murderbot has, was a bit hazier than what was happening in the first 2 novellas. It's also very possible that I wasn't paying enough attention. I was really distracted by other things while I was reading the arc of this, so I definitely need to come back to it. It was good, just I don't think it was quite as great for me as the first 2 were. If I didn't already mention it, this comes out in August, and I read an arc from the publisher, which was really awesome of Tor.com to send that to me. So yeah, I will definitely be reading this again when it comes out. Then I read Justice Hall by Laurie R. King, which is the 6th book in the Russell and Holmes mystery series. Most of this book, or the part that really resonated with me that I loved, is about Russell and Holmes investigating the circumstances under which a young British soldier was shot for cowardice during World War I when he was stationed in France. This young man came from a very well-known and aristocratic family in England, and exactly what happened to him and why he was executed are not explained. It's been very obscured, and there may be a more menacing element to it, that it may have actually kind of been murder. This isn't the complete story of the book, however. It's just kind of an avenue of investigation that Marion and Holmes go down because they're trying to address a broader issue of inheritance within the family in the modern day, which is actually in the 1920s, I think. But the theme of this book, I think, is kind of very young men going off to war in the 1910s and World War I, which I think redefined warfare, just atrocious, completely unlike warfare before, and the conditions that they went through, and the kind of struggle, I think, with how the military, how the armed forces dealt with deserters, like this policy that they had of shooting them, but the backlash against that, and then they continued doing it, but basically lied to soldiers' families back home and didn't actually tell them that their sons had been executed for desertion, for cowardice, for treason or whatever, just kind of tried to not mention it at all. And so it felt like this particular instance that Mary and Holmes were looking into was symbolic of something that happened to an entire generation of soldiers, and whether that was right or wrong, just the emotional cascade years afterwards. It was really emotional. There are just scenes in the book where, you know, the characters are talking to people who were there, who knew this young man, who kind of saw what was going on and couldn't do anything about it, or didn't realize until later that they should have. And just, yeah, you know, there's a toll that that takes on the soul, on the spirit, on the mind. And yeah, it really got to me. I gave this book 5 stars just for that aspect of the book. It's kind of funny to me that this really, I think, pretty magnificent inclusion in the series comes right after one of the books that I disliked the most in this series, continuing on a storyline from that and characters from that. But it just went to this very emotional level that I wasn't expecting. That was really, really great. So if you get this far in the series with the 6th book, you have something really great to look forward to. Next is Bygone Badass Broads, 52 Forgotten Women Who Changed the World by Mackenzi Lee. This highlights a bunch of women from around the world, from different cultures, different countries, and throughout history, who were really interesting, quite amazing. Some of them are good people, some of them were not, like involved in organized crime and piracy, for example, but definitely deserve to be remembered and talked about, because they're, I think, often women who had experiences that we usually say women just didn't get to do those things, only men could have, but these are the exceptions that, you know, tell you sometimes that history is very different from what you've been taught it was. So I thought this was fantastic. I read the entire thing in a single day. It's a lot of pretty brief profiles and biographies, and there is an illustration for each one, and it was just lovely and amazing to read. I would definitely recommend this if you have read and enjoyed Rachel Ignotofsky's books, which are like 50 Women in Science and 50 Women in Sports. I love those books. I found them incredibly inspirational, and that's also, you know, why I picked this up, because I was looking for something kind of similar to continue on with. The only caveat I would say is that Ignotofsky's books are age neutral. In some ways I think they're actually written towards younger people, but I think they can be enjoyed by all ages. This book, you know, it began as a Twitter series, and the way that it reads and the language used and some of like the vulgarities, this is not necessarily appropriate for younger readers, but if you're an adult, go read it now, basically. It's really fun and quick and enjoyable to read. Next up, I read this little collection by Ursula K. Le Guin called The Wild Girls. This is actually an installment in PM Press's Outspoken Authors collection. It's number 6. I did not know that when I picked it up, but now I want to go off and read a bunch of the other ones as well. So this is kind of a hodgepodge collection of a fiction story, 2 essays, an interview, a couple of poems. I don't know if there's supposed to be a unifying theme or principle for this collection. It didn't really feel like it. It just felt like they threw in a bunch of things and called it good. I still really liked it though. I thought that all the bits of it were very interesting. I'm not going to go through all of them all over again, because I wrote a Goodreads review where I talked about each piece one by one, so I'll link that down below. But overall, I quite like it. Nobody's surprised by that because I love everything by Le Guin. The one thing I will say is that the title, The Wild Girls, that's the story in here, and that was a reread for me. I think I understood the story a lot more upon rereading it and thinking about it more, but I find it to be very difficult and rather unpleasant to read. It's not a fun story. The subject matter in it is pretty grim and upsetting, you know, but I'm glad that I reread it because I think that I understand it more now. And the last thing that I have to talk about is, unfortunately, a bit of a disappointment for me, and that is Railsea by China Mieville. I listened to this on audiobook. I've never tried listening to any of Mieville's books on audio, but I just thought, why not? The audiobook was available, and I missed so much while I was listening to this. I felt like I was really only listening to it with a quarter of my brain. I was just distracted by other things, but I also didn't care. There was nothing about this that really pulled me in. I found it very easy to just zone out and think about other things when I was supposed to be listening to it. So I guess like the central premise of this, which is Mieville's reinterpretation or his riff on Moby Dick, just didn't work for me at all. Now, I actually liked Moby Dick. I really enjoyed reading it, but this version, which is trains rather than ships and giant moles rather than whales, it did not work for me. I also felt like the main character, this young man named Sham, was really boring, and like he doesn't know himself. There are a lot of like scenes in the book where he's observing himself acting like his mind is watching his body do things, and he also doesn't know why he's doing things or saying things, like he's not in control of his body. It just felt like he was very aimless, and he didn't know what he was doing, and the reader doesn't know what he's doing either, and what's the point of all of this? I think this one was just one of those misses for me, and that seems to be my experience with China Mieville so far. I either just hate or don't get along with his books, or I completely love them, and this is definitely, like, I didn't hate it, but I didn't get along with it very well either. The next thing might be better. I'll probably be reading Kraken next by Mieville, because that's the next one that my library has. Also don't know anything about that one. I'm gonna go into it blind. And that is that. Those are all the books that I read in the past 2 weeks. I've hit a bit of a rut with my reading right now. I'm not sure what's going on. I've been very interested in starting books, but after like 100 pages, I just stop reading them and go on to start other books. Like the one thing right now that I really want to continue reading is Crazy Rich Asians by Kevin Kwan. So I started reading it on just a random whim quite late last night. I'm already halfway through it. I was reading it until like 1 o'clock in the morning. I have like 8 other books started right now, and I'm just gonna go read the fluffy story about Crazy Rich Asians, and it's a lot of fun. So I hope you are enjoying your weekend. I'll be back soon. Let me know if you have any thoughts about all the books that I've talked about in this video. Leave me a comment or 2 down below, and I will talk to you again soon. And until then, bye.